Bismillah, welcome to a new episode in which we see how to create visual appealing charts in Trilium nodes using JavaScript libraries like Chart.js. This tutorial does not require JavaScript knowledge to be able to connect the libraries. However, expanding over this tutorial and creating further charts would definitely require JavaScript knowledge. So we start here with signing in. This is almost a new Trilium installation, except for the tutorial is done here. So what we want to achieve is creating a chart like this one, line chart, coming out of the data that we have inside Trilium here. So we have some data and we want to create a chart out of it. So let's start from the default demos. So we have here the statistics, and inside it we have a attribute count, and this example has Chart.js pie chart. It has a table, and this is managed by JavaScript. And we can see here a node that is just a render node. Inside of it there's a template which is an HTML, and we can see also JavaScript code that calls other JavaScript code. So let's start by creating our own node that will be adding further nodes inside them. So we'll just create a new node. Let's name it disk usage 2, and let's move it a little up, or maybe like delete the old one and create only one disk usage. Inside this node, let's name it disk usage tutorial. We create here a render node. We can select the type from this button and select render node. And render nodes are basically working by being a relation with an HTML or some other node that would be rendering. So the HTML node we want to access at this point, let's select one that's already there, this template. How do we do that? We select the owned attributes and then select add and add new relation, and then select the name to be render node, and then the target node would be the template inside attribute count, inside statistics, inside Trilium demo. So you can just type template and search for it, select it, and save and close. And now we've just connected this node to the template we have here. Next step is about how do we create this template HTML and the JavaScript inside them. So as we see here, we don't need the template to be a child of the node. However, once we create the template now, so we are gonna create a template now. To make it HTML, we just select the code to be HTML, and then we need to add some HTML here. So this is plain HTML and CSS. We'll just inject our own sample. So we'll paste our HTML snippet here, and this is the division and the canvas that will be displaying the chart inside, and this is just styling for this chart. Now we need to add JavaScript, and for JavaScript it should be a child node. So we start with a simple scenario, which is to create JavaScript inside the node directly. without linking it, so we just name it JavaScript, whatever the name. Usually what I do is that I keep anything that would be changed in the upper levels, and deeper inside stuff that should not be changed. So in this JavaScript file, I'll be adding these functions, and for the type I'll choose JavaScript. And now we can see here we have just a couple of functions, and visualization happens by fetching the data of the node, which is basically the content of the node, which would be in our case some CSV using a specific node ID, and then if the content is there, we'll just parse it, get the data, and transform it. And the transformation function is here to just get some dates and floats from the data, and then we render the line chart. And you can see here that we have three functions: the render line chart, parse CSV, and fetch node data. These functions are not defined here, and they will be actually defined inside JS in child nodes. We can see here these parameters, the node ID and element. This is the element, the HTML element that we will be sending for visualization here and then here, so that the render step would be able to select this element correctly and then render into it. This is coming from the HTML we have here. So we just can name it HTML or any arbitrary name. And now the next step is to create the files that are like the render by chart and render table. It will be our own render line chart and other sub-functions. So the naming for these files will be important, because in the JS file we'll be using the names of the nodes directly. So for the fetch node data, we'll be having this function. Just name it correctly, fetch node data, and basically it gets the node ID and then runs on back end. And running on back end means we will not be able to see the console logs. If we use the dev tools, it will be only available in the show backend log in this menu. And it takes the node ID as an input and then passes it to the backend. The backend uses the node ID and then gets the node and then tries to get the content and then returns the content eventually. After we return it from the backend, we return it again. That's for this function. The next function will be the parse CSV, and for that we'll just create another node and name it parse CSV, paste the content. This function is capturing some CSV content and trying to extract the headers, the first line, if we are giving it as has headers, and then captures all the other data, and then turns data and headers. A third function that we have here, which is the render line chart, and this function is basically what calls the Chart.js. So just paste it here, render line chart, and we see here that we calculate padding. This is not a module export, and we can see here previously from the parse CSV and fetch node data, we can see that each one of them was defined as an export, and they are exposed to the outer world. For the render line chart, we have here the calculate padding. This is a function only called internally, so we don't need to export it. The main function which renders it's exported here, and it's exported as the name render line chart. And we can see here the calculate padding being used inside the function, which just calculates what is the padding in the y-axis so that we have some margin between the graph and the end of the graph canvas. And here we can see that this is Chart.js syntax, normal syntax. If we try to run this code, it will not work because we are missing one important point here. So what we are missing is basically this Chart.js library. So we can use the Chart.js directly, or we can use the plugin that has data labels plus the Chart.js. And in this situation, I'll just copy it and paste it here. Notice that we are using the Chart.js, the same Chart.js version as this one, to avoid any conflicts or basically any differences in syntax that's unnecessary, because Chart.js has changed over time and the syntax changed too. So if you're using 2, 3, or 4, this demo we are using the default versions that are coming with Trilium, which is 0.7.0 for the labels and 2.9.3 for the Chart.js. And now we are finished with the code, so the code here should be complete, but we still will not have the visualization ready for us. First, we need to correct the relation. So instead of render node equal template, we'll have render node equal, and then use HTML. We still will not have anything because we did not upload our data yet. So what does our data look like? It's something like that. It's just a header, CSV header, and then CSV data. So we'll just upload them. I just injected it. You can add it directly here to the tree view, or you can add it to the file here, and it will be uploaded. And we can see it's just a file upload. And what we need to do next is to get the node ID, this value, and inject it into the JavaScript. So here. At this point, we should be able to see our own graph, and it's visible here, and we can see it from outside here. Usually that's enough for us to have this visualization like that, but I prefer to organize the code. So we have here the fetch node data, parse CSV, render line chart. These functions are usually not touched. I don't want to use them or change them unnecessarily in another place, or maybe I want to reuse them. So let's tackle the point of not changing them mistakenly. What I do is that I add an attribute, but this time I would be adding a label, and this label would be, let me add new label and select here read only and set it to any value. Let's say true. Just setting it is enough, and now it's read only. Same here, read only equal true, and same for the render line chart. So we have these files now set as read only. I save them into a library. So let's have a library here. Library, and then maybe add a child node, which is line chart render. And now what we can do is that we copy the content of JS, so the files that are immutable, or that will not be changing, and just paste them here. Ctrl C and Ctrl V. And now we have them linked. That means that if I modified them here, they will be modified also here. And we have them read only, so they are not changed by mistake. Of course, if we want to revert, we have the note revisions here, and we can revert to previous revisions, but I prefer to ensure that they are not touched at all. And for the data, it's already versioned by every upload time. So this is how I manage the reusability and immutability of these files. One side hint also, if we are using Chart.js within this JavaScript node, we don't need to re-import it if we are going to use another chart. It's enough to load it once. Finally, if you want to add another line chart here, all we need to do is update the HTML and create a new division with the canvas. So something like that. That won't be visible unless we add the data and start using JavaScript. So let's add the data too. And we'll take a copy of the node ID and use it in JavaScript. Something like that. And if we go now to the render node, we can see the other graph shown here too. I'll be leaving the code for this JS and HTML file in a guest in the description. With that, I've reached the end of the video. I wish you found it helpful, and see you in the next episode.